If I can draw you out on a subject you don't want to talk about, I'd like to talk about AI. Because you've had a very busy year already with AI in Mississippi. It might be easy just to catch everybody up. Starting with the executive order on AI. What have you done in Mississippi in the last few months on this?
Yeah, I think that it's an incredibly important piece of our economic future in our state. Obviously, we've been successful at attracting large data center projects in our state. To Secretary Burgum's point, or Governor Burgum to me, but he is exactly right. The states that have availability of power are the states that have an economic future. And the states who do not want to have an availability of power are going to struggle in the future, in my view. And so, we also think that workforce is incredibly important. And so I actually have done a couple of things around that. We did sign an executive order outlining what Mississippi's goals are in the AI space. We also created what's called what we call MAIN, which is Mississippi's AI Network, which consists of all of our community colleges, we have 8 institutions of higher learning, including our historically black colleges, and we have one-stop shop focused on how are we going to train the workforce of tomorrow. And I think if you talk to a lot of the players in the AI space, Mississippi is actually far ahead of many other places in terms of creating exactly what that looks like. How are we training folks at our community colleges to be prepared for those jobs? How are we actually creating 4-year degree programs for people in that space? And it's going incredibly well, and we think we're setting ourselves up for success in the future.
It's very early, but just what does it mean that you set up these institutions? There's the network, which I think no other state has.
That's right.
Of that, yeah. But are there early conclusions from what you've seen already?
Well, what I would tell you is it is very early.
Yeah.
But we were actually out in California for a conference recently, and our head of workforce development, workforce training, was on a panel, and the person that was doing the panel basically commented that Mississippi is way further ahead than California, which was a shock to many of the people in the room. But we're also further ahead than most. And so what we are seeing, and now we're getting more and more partnerships from companies that are looking to locate businesses, but also looking to hire, because it's going to take people with a different level of skills to be able to provide and fill those jobs. And we are doing, I think, something that very few states are doing in that regard.
And you also just are getting rid of the income tax, a long-term project, state income tax. What, in planning that, you've spoken about it, what the impact was going to be, what the advantage of the state was going to be. But one, what is the impact going to be? And two, how does the state without an income tax pay for everything it's paying for now?
Yeah, so let's start with where we find ourselves financially in Mississippi. Mississippi is a state that in 2024 had the lowest unemployment rate in the history of our state. For the eternity of my lifetime, I'm 50 years old, Mississippi has always had an unemployment rate that is basically the national average plus 1.5%. Today, we have an unemployment rate that is the national average minus 1.5%. We have more people working today than at any time in our state's history. And our belief is that government ought to take less so that individuals who earn the money can keep more. And so we start this fiscal year with a revenue of approximately $7.8 billion, and we have a expenditure budget of $7.05 billion. So we have a $750 million surplus. We're projected to have $2.7 billion in the bank on a $7 billion general fund budget. So almost 40% of our general fund budget we have set aside for a rainy day. And so we are in the best financial shape we've ever been in. We're in the best fiscal shape we've ever been in. And it's because we have the second fastest growing economy in the country. If you look at GDP growth in 2024, Mississippi was number 2 in the nation. If you look at per capita income growth in 2024, Mississippi was number 4 in the nation. And so we've got a lot of things going right. When your economy is growing at those levels, by definition, revenue grows as well. And so what we're trying to do, because we are situated in an area of our country where you don't have to be a geography expert to know that we have Texas to our west, Florida to our east, and Tennessee to our north, all 3 of which have no income tax. So they are at a competitive advantage to us when we are recruiting business and industry into our state, and they are at a competitive advantage when they are recruiting people into their state. So this year, we had a major tax cut that I championed in 2016. We had another one in 2021. And because of those 2 successes, there are 9 states in America that have no individual income tax. Of the 41 states that do have one, Mississippi currently has the 5th lowest. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to go to 0. And we wanted to become the first state since Alaska in 1980 that actually had an income tax and is going to eliminate it. And that bill got to my desk this year, and I signed it into law. Now we're doing it responsibly. Mm-hmm. We're going to go from what is now 4% individual income tax rate in our state down to 3% by 2030. And beyond 2030, as long as revenues in the preceding fiscal year grow, as long as revenues are greater than expected expenditures in the next fiscal year, we will reduce that individual income tax by 0.3% per year. Mm-hmm. So it'll take us 10 years to go then from 3 to 0. But it has created a ton of excitement, both internally with the people who are working. It is encouraging more people to get into the workforce. We have actually turned around, COVID did a lot of bad things in a lot of places. One of the bad things that occurred in virtually every place is the workforce participation rate declined considerably. Mm-hmm. We have actually turned that around in our state, where our workforce participation rate is, which once was the worst in the nation, has turned around. We're at about 2.5% higher than we were at its lowest point. And so more and more people are entering the workforce because, again, they have more financial incentive to do so. Mm. And that's a big deal.
Well, you've talked about success and talked about a surplus, and another part of that I'm curious about is the Trump administration did not give FEMA relief that Arkansas asked for. You can update me on the status of FEMA relief for the tornadoes in Mississippi, but the premise the Trump administration seems to be operating on is that states should be paying more of the burden for these disasters. So again, I keep doing a 2-part question almost by accident. What's the status of FEMA relief now, and is that correct, that states should be picking up more of this burden?
Well, we actually have a request before the administration because we received many of the same storms that Arkansas and Tennessee and others received. My wife's hometown of Tylertown, Mississippi, got hammered by a major tornado that was on the ground for 70 miles. That is very unusual. Typically, tornadoes hit the ground, they do massive damage, and they go up. But this particular one was on the ground for almost 70 miles and did a ton of damage. I think that as we work through the process, we expect that we will get declared a major disaster area. We will meet the guidelines that are in the Stafford Act, and we're going to work very closely with the administration on trying to get that done. When you have storms like a tornado, because we've dealt with, on one end, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, which was at the time the largest natural disaster in American history by a factor of 5x. And then we dealt with a much smaller storms like what we're dealing with here. And it has often taken FEMA quite a long period of time to determine that the damages that are claimed are actually real. We have a very strong emergency management agency that we go in and we document everything. We fly drones immediately following the storm, and so I'm hopeful that will get approved.
So is the administration, is there something you want to tell it about how ready states are to deal with their own disaster relief? I'm not trying to mischaracterize the executive order, but it does put more burden on states.
No, and I think that's what we've got to figure out. We've got if the rules of the game are going to change. Typically in when FEMA does declare a natural disaster, the states typically bear 25% of the cost. And so any expenditure that the federal government through FEMA approves, the feds pay 75%. And the way we do it is the state bears 25%, and we then have our local governments pay half of that. And so and so it's 12.5% state, 12.5% local, unless we have legislation which changes that, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. And I think that that's a model that has been utilized for quite some time, and I think it'll probably continue.
So in another federal interaction, you sent Drew Snyder up from Mississippi to the administration to work in Medicare at CMS. And I'm curious, if we don't know exactly what they're going to do with Medicaid funding yet or waivers.
Right.
But if there is Medicaid funding cuts, if there is more flexibility given to states, how do you want it to change in Mississippi?
Yeah, no, I'm super proud of Drew Snyder.
Yeah.
Drew, for those of you who do not know, worked for me from the day I was elected governor, and was sworn in January of 2020 until late 2024, and now is in charge of the Medicaid division at CMS, and is going to do a phenomenal job. Because he is very knowledgeable of the program. When you talk about Medicaid cuts, my argument to members of Congress as well as to the administration is to recognize that there are really two different Medicaid populations. There is the traditional Medicaid population, which consists of, I would argue, those individuals that ought to be on Medicaid. And then there is the expansion Medicaid population. That is the Medicaid population that the Affordable Care Act allowed to go into Medicaid that had never before been eligible. That is, and in that expansion population, that is able-bodied adults between the ages of 18 and 65 that I would argue in many instances should be working but choose not to. Well, I don't understand any world where it makes sense that the traditional Medicaid population is funded, again, in our state, 76% funding comes from the federal government, 24% comes from the state government. But the expansion population, again, reminder, the able-bodied adults between 18 and 65 is funded at 90% by the federal government and only 10% by the states. In Mississippi, we are one of 10 states that chose not to expand under the Affordable Care Act. And so I'm a little bit biased in this, but I think it just makes good public policy sense. My view is if there's going to be reductions in spending at the federal level, the best and smartest and way in which to do that is to take that 90% match on the Affordable Care Act and reduce it back towards what the feds pay on the traditional Medicaid population. So, and you don't have to do it overnight. You don't have to go from 90 to 70% just like that. You can do 90 to 88, 88 to 86 on a year-over-year basis. You could go 90 to 89, 89 to 88. Whatever you choose to do, that then allows for states, governors particularly, to make a decision. Is it worth it to them to keep that expanded population on government-run health care, or is it not? And I think some would say yes and some would say no. But to me, if you're going to find $880 billion in savings, which is what the House says they want to find in Medicaid, there are literally, that's only $88 billion a year. By simply making that change, I believe you could get the vast majority of that done fairly quickly. It takes benefits away from no one that currently has it, unless the individual states choose to take those away.
So it sounds like
with that expansion population.
So you're ready if that's the reform they make. Mississippi's ready to do it, and if there's a headline that says, "Look at all the people who are going to lose their Medicaid," you're ready to rush right in and explain.
No one that would lose their Medicaid benefits under that strategy would lose it unless the individual states chose to allow them to lose it.
Another thing, because you talked about how much the economy is growing, people moving in. Well, if I was listening to kind of progressive think tanks a couple of years ago, they'd say, well, Mississippi won the Dobbs decision and their abortion law, that's going to be a disincentive to people moving in and investing. The gender medicine laws, that's going to be a disincentive. What's actually been your experience? What is it? Because I saw estimates in 2022, and I'm not sure they've been right, but what's the experience of having those conservative social policies on your ability to bring business in?
Well, the same progressives who said Dobbs was going to destroy our economy, that, as you mentioned, are the same ones who said when we started cutting taxes in 2016 that was going to destroy our economy, and that our revenues were going to decline drastically. They've been wrong every single time. Our economy has been booming. Our economy has been growing. I mentioned earlier, GDP growth rate in 2024 far surpassed the national average, far surpassed every other state but one, and it's just it's good to see. And I think COVID and the pandemic is one reason for that, because what occurred during the pandemic is we didn't shut down our state. Our people, we took precautions, but our people got up and went to work, and there were CEOs that are probably here today and all around the country and all around the globe that said and saw that Mississippi was open for business. And then the final thing I'll just mention with respect to our state and the reason our economy has grown is while many states over the last 30 years have given up on manufacturing, Mississippi has invested in manufacturing. We've invested in a workforce that understands advanced manufacturing and can produce products. That's what we do in our state. We make stuff. And because of that, I think you're going to see continued economic growth in our state because as we see reshoring and onshoring back onto America's soil, states like Mississippi that didn't give up on manufacturing are going to be big winners.
So you've not had an interaction with the potential employer that is worried about moving to the state because of those policies. How do we explain to our we're moving from New York to Mississippi? Look at the different social policies. Not been a problem at all.
We have not seen that as a problem. And I'm sure there are some who keep us off the list, and we never hear from them. But whether it's in economic development or tourism, Mississippi's biggest challenge is convincing someone to come to our state once. If you ever come to our state, you're going to like what you see because we are the hospitality state, and we're named that for a reason. We have good people who show up to work and who can make stuff.
And I wanted to ask about the education reforms too, because that's another area where you changed. There was criticism of kind of the phonics-based education, but what have you been doing that has turned around the test score numbers education in the state?
Well, it's what the New York Times called the Mississippi miracle. I must admit, I almost choked on my catfish when I read that the New York Times was saying something nice about Mississippi. But the results are incredible. In 2012 and 2013, we instituted conservative reforms in our legislature. I was lieutenant governor at the time and helped shepherd them through, and the results are incredible. In 2013, Mississippi's fourth grade reading numbers were 49th best in the country. Last year, we were 9th best in the country. In 2013, Mississippi's fourth grade math, we were 50th in the nation. Last year, we were 16th best in the nation. And these conservative reforms, the beauty of it is that they're not just helping some kids in some school districts, all of our kids are benefiting. If you looked at our African American fourth graders in 2013 and compared them to their peers in fourth grade reading, they scored 45th best amongst their peers. If you look at it last year, they were 3rd best in America in fourth grade reading when compared to their peers. Hispanic students in our state, number 1 in the nation in their fourth grade reading results last year when compared to their peers. They were number 2 in the nation in fourth grade math results. The facts are our high school graduation rates have gone from 72.5% to 90% of our kids graduated high school. Incredible.
And what are the key parts? You talk about conservative reform, and I mentioned phonics. But what is the key thing here too? And not to give ideas to one of your competitor states, but but these seem like they might be
No, well, a lot of our competitor states don't like to admit it, but they're actually copying our legislation now.
Okay.
And some of them will admit it, and it's a beautiful thing. And look, we've had people all over the country telling other states the way to do this because that's what's best for America. If you look at fourth grade reading results and really all of the NAEP testing, there were only 9 states that over the last 10 years actually saw improvements. 41 states declined in their results over a 10-year period. And the President Trump has said this, and it's true. If you look at America as a whole and compare us to the other 39 to 40 industrialized nations, where we are is not a good spot as a country. And so what did we do? We started teaching the basics. We went back to phonics, which is a far superior way in which to teach reading. We hired reading coaches, spent $15 million a year hiring reading coaches and putting them in individual schools, but also those reading coaches started helping teach the teachers how to be better reading teachers. We then hired math coaches. We've now hired career coaches that we're putting in every high school. We introduced school choice. We have ESAs now for students with special needs, which was very much needed. And so our kids that have special needs are in much better opportunities because their parents have choice now. We instituted public charter schools in our D and F districts. We changed the way in which we rate our schools and our school districts now, and we copied Florida when we said every school in Mississippi is going to be rated A, B, C, D, or F, because every parent knows that if they're in an A-rated school, that school's doing well, and they also know if they're in an F-rated school, they need to do something about it. And so we really simplified things. And oh, by the way, we implemented it well at our State Department of Education. And most importantly, our teachers and our kids and our parents did what Mississippians do. We raised the level of expectations, and they rose up and met those increased expectations. And one other thing I'll just mention, in addition to all that, we also put in a test at the end of the third grade for reading. And if you don't score above a certain level, you cannot be promoted from the third to fourth grade. We ended social promotion in the state of Mississippi. And Jeb Bush used to always say, what gets measured gets done. If you're not reading at an adequate level at the end of the third grade, you stay in the third grade in the state of Mississippi. That was widely ridiculed. It was argued that it would keep literally thousands and thousands of kids being held back, but that's not been our experience at all. What's happened is everyone has rallied around making sure kids can read. And here's why it's important. Between pre-kindergarten and third grade, kids need to be learning to read. But beyond the third grade, they better not be learning to read. They better be reading to learn. And that's our theme in Mississippi. And we've seen tremendous results.
Well, thank you for talking about it. And I see a red light blinking, so I think... But no, I appreciate the time, and thank you for telling us about what's going on there.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.